Alex never thought he'd be the kind of man to get cheated on. He always believed that if you treated your partner well, remained faithful, and built a strong foundation of trust, betrayal wouldn't even be a possibility. But as he stood in the dimly lit bedroom, staring at the undeniable proof of his wife's affair, reality shattered that naive belief into a million jagged pieces. Jessica had always been the kind of woman who turned heads. Confident, intelligent, and stunningly beautiful, she was the type of person who could command a room without saying a word. When they first met, Alex had been mesmerized by her, drawn to her magnetic charm. Their love had seemed effortless. At least, that's what he thought. Now, he wondered how long he had been blind to the truth. The signs had been there, subtle at first. Late nights at work. A sudden obsession with her appearance. Guarded texts, quickly swiped away when he walked into the room. He had brushed it all off, convincing himself that Jessica was just busy, that he was being paranoid. But the uneasy feeling in his gut had only grown stronger. It wasn't until last week that he finally decided to trust his instincts. Jessica had come home late, her perfume stronger than usual, her smile just a little too forced. When she fell asleep, her phone vibrated on the nightstand. Alex had never been the type to invade her privacy, but something in him snapped that night. He reached for the phone, hands trembling as he unlocked it using her birthday. What he found made his stomach drop. Messages, hundreds of them. Some playful, some intimate, some downright explicit. And then there were the photos. Pictures of Jessica, pictures of her lover. Hotel rooms. Candlelit dinners. She hadn't just had an affair, she had been living a double life. He barely remembered confronting her the next morning. His voice had been calm, but inside, he was a storm. He showed her the messages, the pictures, waiting for her to break down, to beg for forgiveness. But Jessica didn't react the way he expected. She didn't cry. She didn't deny it. She didn't even look ashamed. Instead, she crossed her arms and smirked. So what? You already know now. Alex felt like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. So what? He repeated, barely able to process the words. You've been lying to me for months, and that's all you have to say? Jessica let out a small, mocking laugh. Look, Alex, I didn't plan for this to happen. But I don't regret it. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Honestly, I'd do it again if I had to. His vision blurred with rage. He had prepared himself for tears, for excuses, even for a desperate attempt to salvage their marriage. But this was worse than the betrayal itself. Why? His voice was hoarse. Why would you throw everything away like this? Jessica sighed, as if she were bored by the conversation. Because I wanted to. Because I needed more. And because, frankly, I knew you wouldn't do anything about it. That was the moment something inside Alex shifted. He had been heartbroken before, but this was different. It was like a switch had flipped in his mind, turning pain into something colder, sharper. He wasn't just going to walk away from this. No. Jessica thought she had won. She thought she had broken him. But she had no idea what was coming next. Alex spent the next few days in a haze of emotions, anger, betrayal, and something else, something darker. He had replayed Jessica's words in his head over and over again. Asterisk, I'd do it again if I had to. Asterisk. She wasn't just unfaithful, she was unapologetic, arrogant, and convinced she had the upper hand. She believed he would either stay and tolerate her behavior or walk away with his tail between his legs, broken and humiliated. She was wrong. At first, Alex had considered the usual options. Divorce. Packing up and leaving. Exposing her affair to family and friends. But none of those seemed satisfying enough. Jessica deserved more than just to lose her husband. She needed to lose everything she took for granted. That's when an idea began to form. It wasn't immediate, but as he sat in their shared home, surrounded by reminders of their life together, he realized something important. Jessica had always underestimated him. She saw him as predictable, passive. She thought he lacked the backbone to stand up for himself. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. Alex started by gathering information. He already knew Jessica's affair partner was someone from her office, but now he needed details. Through a few social media searches, he confirmed what he suspected. The guy, Darren, wasn't just some random fling. He was Jessica's superior, her boss. And that meant there were rules being broken. Corporate policies were strict about relationships between managers and subordinates, especially when it came to conflicts of interest. If someone reported the affair, it wouldn't just cause gossip, it could cost Darren his job. Jessica, too, could face consequences, especially if there was proof that she had received professional favors because of their relationship. Alex also remembered that Jessica had a weakness, her reputation. She thrived on social validation, making sure everyone believed she had the perfect life. If people saw her as anything less than successful, it would crush her. With this in mind, he began setting the trap. First, he made copies of every incriminating message, every explicit photo, and every piece of evidence he had found on her phone. He backed them up in multiple places, ensuring that even if she tried to delete them, they wouldn't disappear. Next, he reached out to an old friend, one who worked in the same industry as Jessica. With careful wording, Alex planted the idea that there were rumors swirling about a workplace affair. His friend, eager for some gossip, agreed to discreetly ask around. Then came the financial aspect. While Jessica had been busy with her affair, Alex had been quietly handling their finances. He knew every account, every bill, every investment. She had no idea that most of their assets were in his name. The house? His. The savings? Mostly his. She had a personal account, sure, but compared to what Alex controlled, it was nothing. So he began making adjustments. He transferred funds, secured his assets, and ensured that when the time came, Jessica wouldn't be walking away with much. The final step was the most satisfying. Jessica had a big work event coming up, a high-profile networking gala where she would be surrounded by colleagues, clients, and potential investors. It was a night where she needed to appear polished, successful, and untouchable. It was also the perfect place for everything to come crashing down. Alex kept his composure in the days leading up to the event. He acted normal, calm, distant, but not suspicious. Jessica barely noticed. She was too wrapped up in her own world to pay attention to him. The night before the gala, she had the audacity to leave their house early, claiming she was staying at a hotel to prepare for the event. Alex didn't even question it. He just smiled and kissed her on the cheek. She thought she had won. She had no idea what was coming next. The night of the gala arrived, and Alex was ready. Every piece of the plan had been carefully set in motion, and all that was left was for Jessica to walk into her own downfall. The venue was an upscale hotel, filled with polished executives, investors, and industry elites. It was the kind of event where reputations were made or destroyed. Jessica had spent weeks talking about how this night was crucial for her career. If things went well, she could secure a major promotion. She had even mentioned how Darren, her boss-turned-lover, was putting in a good word for her. She had no idea that by the end of the night, her career would be the least of her worries. Alex arrived dressed in a tailored suit, blending in effortlessly with the crowd. He wasn't there as her date. Jessica hadn't even invited him. As far as she knew, he was at home, licking his wounds, still too heartbroken to act. He spotted her instantly. Jessica stood in the center of the room, radiating confidence in an elegant black gown, her signature smirk plastered across her face. Darren was beside her, leaning in just a little too close. The way she laughed at his jokes, the way her fingers grazed his arm, it was sickening. Alex wasn't alone, though. He had invited a few special guests. Among them were key members of Jessica's company, including the HR director and a couple of board members. More importantly, he had also arranged for a discreet meeting with an investigative journalist who had a keen interest in corporate scandals. Everything was set. It was time. He pulled out his phone and sent a pre-written email. It was simple, direct, and devastating. Within seconds, every major executive at Jessica's firm received an anonymous tip, one containing screenshots of her explicit messages with Darren, detailed records of company-paid hotel stays, and evidence suggesting that her recent promotions weren't just based on merit. As expected, it didn't take long for the whispers to start. Jessica was mid-conversation when she noticed the first change. A senior partner who had been speaking with her suddenly stiffened, checked his phone, and walked away without a word. Then another colleague glanced at her, eyes wide with shock, before quickly excusing herself. The murmur spread like wildfire. Then, the HR director approached Darren, phone in hand. Whatever was on the screen made Darren's face go ghostly pale. Jessica frowned, stepping closer, but before she could ask what was going on, another executive approached her with a sharp, unforgiving glare. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, holding up his phone. Jessica's confident facade cracked. She took the phone, scanning the damning screenshots. Alex saw it all. The widening of her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing chatter in the room. "It was sent to every senior member of the company," the executive snapped. "Jessica, what have you done?" Darren tried to intervene, but it was too late. The HR director was already calling security. Jessica turned in every direction, desperate for an escape, but there was none. Colleagues she once charmed were now glaring at her with disgust. Darren was already being escorted out, his career hanging by a thread. And Jessica was right in the center of it all, unraveling. Then, just as she thought things couldn't get worse, Alex made his move. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, making sure she saw him. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Jessica looked truly afraid. Alex gave her a small, satisfied smile. "You thought I wouldn't do anything about it," he said softly just for her to hear. "How does it feel to be wrong?" Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a voice echoed through the room. "Excuse me, Miss Carter." She turned sharply, only to see a woman holding a microphone, a reporter. "We have a few questions for you regarding the corporate policy violations and misconduct allegations that have just surfaced. Would you care to comment?" Cameras flashed. More whispers. More gasps. Jessica stumbled back. "No, this isn't." Alex chuckled under his breath. She had never looked smaller. She had thought she was untouchable, that she could betray him, humiliate him, and walk away without consequence. She never saw this coming. The aftermath of the gala was swift, and it was brutal. By the time Jessica returned home that night, her world had crumbled. She had been called into a meeting with the board of directors first thing the next morning. There were no apologies, no second chances. The evidence of her affair with Darren was too damning. By noon, Darren was officially fired, his career in shambles. Jessica was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation, her once coveted promotion now a distant memory. The company's reputation had taken a huge hit, and Jessica was at the center of the scandal. But that wasn't even the worst part. Her personal life was about to implode. Alex had been meticulous in his planning, and while Jessica had been distracted by the chaos at work, he had worked on the final phase of his plan. It wasn't just about ruining her professional life. It was about exposing the truth, making her feel the weight of her actions in every aspect of her existence. He had contacted a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, one who was known for his ruthless efficiency in divorce cases. Alex wasn't interested in fighting for an apology or reconciliation. He wanted justice. The divorce papers were served the following morning. Jessica opened the envelope with a mixture of disbelief and dread. She had hoped, at first, that maybe, just maybe, Alex would come to his senses. Maybe he would forgive her, like so many other men in her past had. But the papers made it clear that Alex wasn't just done with her. He was prepared to take everything. The house. The savings. The assets. Everything she had taken for granted was now in jeopardy. But Alex wasn't finished yet. He made sure the media knew the details of the scandal. A few carefully placed phone calls to the right people had ensured that the story of Jessica's affair, her betrayal of both Alex and the company, would be plastered across the front pages of every news outlet. Her carefully curated image as a successful, confident woman had shattered in an instant. The world was now watching her unravel. Jessica tried to fight back. She reached out to her connections, pleaded with anyone who might listen, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Her reputation was in tatters, and her career was over. The affair was no longer a private matter. It was public, messy, and unforgivable. In the weeks that followed, her phone rang off the hook with calls from people she once considered friends, people who now turned their backs on her. The shame was suffocating. And then came the final blow. Alex had one last piece of leverage. The house they had lived in for years, Jessica's beloved home, had been sold. Not to anyone else, though. It had been transferred to Alex's name entirely. He had made sure the property was secure before she could claim any part of it in the divorce. Jessica had never seen it coming. When she finally faced him, months after the scandal had fully unfolded, she had lost everything. She was no longer the confident, successful woman who could make people bend to her will. She was a pariah. And Alex? He was standing tall, his life in order, his dignity intact. As for Jessica, she could only stand there in silence, the weight of her choices pressing down on her like an anvil. "You said you'd do it again if you had to," Alex reminded her, his voice low and steady. "Well, you did. And now you've lost everything." Her eyes filled with tears. Tears of regret, of anger, and of disbelief. She had thought she was the one in control. But in the end, Alex had played the long game, and he had won. "Goodbye, Jessica," Alex said softly, turning away. And just like that, her world faded into the background. She had no one left, no one but herself to blame for the mess she had created. As the door clicked shut behind him, Jessica was left with nothing but the bitter taste of her own choices and a deep, gnawing understanding that some betrayals come with a price too high to pay.